Lowly handmaid saved the poisoned Alpha King. What he did next shocked her. She was born with nothing but a name she couldn't spend. Serene, daughter of a dead physician, handmaid to a crown that barely noticed she existed, had spent 11 years inside Valderhaven's black stone walls, paying a debt that was never truly hers. She carried her father's knowledge in her hands and her grief in her silence, and she had learned very early that women like her survived by being useful and invisible in equal measure. Then came the night of 100 noble ladies, a feast designed to find a king his queen, and someone slipped poison into his wine. Not poison to kill, something worse. An ancient compound, crafted to prove, in front of a continent's worth of witnesses, that the King of Aldenmore had no one who truly loved him. That behind every smile in that glittering hall was ambition, not feeling. That he was, beneath the crown, entirely alone. 97 women tried to wake him. 97 women failed. And then everyone in that room turned to look at the handmaid, standing quietly at the edge. The one who had spent 4 years staring at the wall behind his ear, pretending she didn't know the difference between his court smile and his real one. So why, when she finally knelt beside him, did he say her name before he even opened his eyes? Follow along to find out what happened next. This story is just getting started. Kingdom of Aldenmore, Northern Europe, 12th century. The physician's chamber smelled of dried rue and extinguished candles. Caleb stood in the doorway, 16 years old, 3 weeks into a princehood he hadn't asked for, and looked at the girl who wasn't crying. He had expected tears. Grief in this castle always arrived with sound, the wet catching a breath, composure cracking like ice under a boot. What he had not expected was this: a girl with white gold hair sitting perfectly straight beside her dead father's bed, holding his cold hand between both of hers, her eyes fixed on the winter sky beyond the narrow window. Still. Utterly still. Her eyes, when the last coal in the brazier caught them, were the pale gray of frozen rivers. Dry as ash, dry as something that had already burned through and left nothing to consume. He should have delivered the formal condolences. 6 words, rehearsed that morning with his father's careful coaching. The crown mourns Master Harwick, faithful physician. 6 words, a bow, and then leave. He said none of them. He stood in that doorway and felt something lodge beneath his ribs. Not pity, not exactly. Something with no name yet. Something that felt the way the moment before a wound begins to ache feels. The body knowing before the mind does. I have never seen anyone carry grief that quietly. She did not look at him. She didn't seem to know he was there. He found, strangely, that he could not make himself turn away, could not reduce this girl, this stillness, this specific quality of endurance, to something he simply passed through and left behind. He left eventually. He told himself he would come back when she was ready. 11 years later, he still watched her, but didn't dare approach. The great hall of Valderhaven smelled of beeswax, mulled wine, and ambition, and Serene wanted none of it. She registered all 3 as she slipped through the back corridor toward the supply room, arms full of linen-wrapped bottles, her mind already 3 steps ahead. Fennel oil running low, the winter sage barely half a rack, the dried willow bark needing rotation before mold found it. The feast noise pressed through the stone like water through old mortar. High laughter, the scrape of benches, voices performing themselves for an audience of 100 strangers. She had no business in the great hall tonight. That was, in fact, the entire point. 100 noble ladies, Dame Isolde had announced at morning briefing, in the careful tone of someone delivering news they have decided opinions about, but will not voice them. By the council's arrangement, His Majesty has been asked to select a queen before the first snowfall. Serene had written down the inventory list. She had gone about her day. She had done both of these things without once thinking about storm-gray eyes and the particular set of a jaw she had learned to read the way sailors read the color of the horizon. She was nearly at the supply corridor when the great hall doors swung open and the noise rushed out like something escaped from a cage, and she stopped. Through the open doors, 100 gowns like a garden in candlelight, every shade of jewel and petal arranged for a king to walk through. Women laughing, women glittering, women who had been raised and polished and readied precisely for this moment. And at the far end, on the dais, Calum. He stood among his advisors with the stillness of a man who has decided to bear something without complaint. A decision visible in the set of his shoulders, the careful arrangement of his expression. His dark hair, black as ink in lamplight, was pushed back from his face. He was taller than the men beside him by half a head, broad-shouldered in a way that had less to do with ceremony and everything to do with the 4 campaigns he'd led before he was 25. He was smiling at a woman in rose silk. His eyes were somewhere else entirely. The smile he wore for courts and councils and political feasts like this one was not the smile she knew. She knew the other, the rare, unguarded version that appeared when something caught him off guard and his control slipped for just a fraction of a second. She had spent 4 years telling herself she didn't know the difference. She was turning away when his gaze crossed the room and found her. The breath left her body without asking permission. She turned back toward the supply corridor and walked at exactly the pace of a woman with somewhere to be and no interest whatsoever in anything behind her. Serene. Her name, in his voice, said the way one says a word worn smooth by a decade of use. Not formal, not summoning, just her name, just that. She turned. He had extracted himself from the rose silk lady with the practiced efficiency of a man who had long experience escaping rooms. He stood 2 feet away. This close, she could see the faint tightness around his eyes that meant he'd been headaching since mid-afternoon, and the slight tension at the base of his jaw that meant he was very carefully not saying something he had decided not to say. She had been cataloging these details for 11 years. She was tired of knowing them by heart. Your Majesty. She kept her voice level, the voice she used for medical consultations, for Lord Edric's lectures on propriety, for every interaction she'd conducted over the last 4 years, from behind a wall of professional composure. You have wine on your sleeve. A pause that lasted 1 beat too long. I'm aware. The stain will set before morning. I imagine it will. His head tilted, barely, a fraction of a degree, imperceptible on any other face, but not on his, not to her. I thought I saw you looking at me earlier. You had wine on your sleeve. I was assessing the damage. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not the court smile. She had a rule about looking at the corner of his mouth. She applied it now. Brennan, he said, without turning. Behind him, his guard, a broad-shouldered man whose cheerful face had never quite suited the gravity of his position, made a sound like a cough, concealing a laugh. I'll tell Lady Aldris you've been urgently detained by a medical consultation, sire. The council wants me to choose before winter, Calum said. He was still looking at her. So I've heard. She addressed the wall behind his left ear, a technique developed over years of careful practice. Is there a medical question in there somewhere? Does there need to be? Yes, there does. Because we do not have other kinds of conversations. And that is a boundary I drew 4 years ago, and I would like you to let me keep it. Your Majesty should return to his guests, she said instead. He looked at her for 1 moment longer, then was entirely comfortable. The way he examined things he was deciding about, slow and complete, missing nothing. Then he nodded, once, and turned back toward the bright room and the 100 women waiting in it. Serene went to the supply corridor and counted bottles until her hands forgot what they were doing and started trembling, and she made them stop. She was halfway through the time oil when the sound of a goblet striking stone reached her through 2 sets of doors, and she was already moving before she fully understood why. The crash was different from the general percussion of the feast, heavier, with a finality to it. Serene came through the hall doors at a pace that was not running, because running through a room full of panicking nobility creates more problems than it solves, but was something close. She was in time to see Calem's hand open, the goblet already fallen. And then, far more alarming, the slow, heavy collapse of the tallest man in the room. Brennan caught him at the shoulder. It wasn't enough. She went to her knees on the stone floor beside him before anyone else had moved, 2 fingers already at the pulse point inside his wrist. Present. Slow. Wrong. Not the slowness of wine or ordinary sleep, the thick, dragging slowness of something that had gotten into the blood and was sitting on it like a stone. Clear space. She did not raise her voice. She made it carry instead. All of you, now. The room erupted. Assassination hissed between teeth, poison thrown across the hall like a lit torch. At least one woman was repeating "the king" in an ascending pitch that would have been more useful if it were doing anything other than ascending. Ambassador Corvin, she noted this automatically, filed it, had already taken 3 quiet steps toward the far doors, the movement too deliberate to be instinct. "He is not dying," she said, at the frequency that cuts through noise rather than joins it. "I need space, and I need quiet." Sir Gareth was moving people back with the systematic calm of a man who had cleared rooms under worse circumstances. She turned Calem's face toward her. His eyes were half open, the dark gray-black of them clouded, dulled down to something muffled and far away. His pupils were uneven, but not catastrophically so. He was fighting whatever it was. She could see it in the locked tension of his jaw, the way his hands had tried to close before they lost the strength. Then his gaze found her face. She had 11 years of practice not examining what that particular thing felt like. She filed it under irrelevant, with the thoroughness of long habit, and focused on his wrist. Slow heartbeat, weighted breath, externally introduced. She bent closer, the professional proximity of diagnosis, the proximity she was allowed. And there, beneath the wine and the feast smells, and the beeswax, dried lilac, the bright, almost sweet edge of winter root underneath. She knew that combination. Her father had written about it in the 3rd notebook, the one on compound botanical sedatives. She had read that notebook 8 times. She sat back. "I need Physician Aldous and Lord Edric Voss, and the Veldrath ambassador is not to leave this hall." Brennan, kneeling at Calem's other side, had gone very still. "You know what it is." "I know what it isn't." Already categorizing, already working the chain of inference. "It isn't meant to kill, that's the first thing. Everything else we can discuss once he's moved somewhere quieter." She made herself not look at his face again. She almost succeeded. Before Serene could turn fully back to her patient, she caught it again. The scent that had reached her over the wine and the candle smoke, the same compound, but thinner now, clinging to fabric. She stood, slowly, and let her nose do what it had always done better than anything else she owned. The hall was full of perfume and spilled wine and 50 different bodies, and underneath all of it, one thread of winter root and dried lilac that led, like a seam pulled through cloth, to a woman standing near the east pillar with both hands pressed around a small embroidered handkerchief. Lady Margot, from Veldrath, who had been near the king's table all evening, and who was now holding that handkerchief so tightly her knuckles had gone the color of bone. Serene crossed the room without hurrying. She came to stand beside Margot, not in front, not confronting, just adjacent, the way she stood when she needed information from a patient who was frightened. "My lady," she said, very quietly, "I need to know what you gave him." Margot's head turned. Her eyes were wide, the white showing at the edges. I would never." "I know you didn't mean harm." Serene kept her voice even, kept it low, kept it only between the 2 of them. "But the scent you're carrying is the same as what's in his blood right now. I need to know exactly what it was and who gave it to you." A silence. Then Margot's breath came out in pieces, the way breath comes when someone has been holding it too long. She had been given it by Ambassador Corvin himself, she said, pressed into her hand that morning before the feast. He had told her it was a love-waking tincture, old northern magic, harmless, that it would open the king's heart to her, make him see her truly. She had believed him. She had wanted to be seen. Serene listened. She did not judge. She had treated enough frightened people to know that cruelty and foolishness wore the same face when someone was in its grip. "Thank you," she said, when Margot had finished. "You'll need to tell this to Lord Edric and Sir Gareth. I'll walk with you." Margot looked at her. "Will I be—" "You were deceived," Serene said. "That is a fact. Stay near that fact." She brought Margot to Lord Edric personally, laid out the chain of evidence in 3 sentences, and watched Edric's expression travel from outrage at her presence to reluctant attention to the particular compressed look of a man filing something away for later action. Sir Gareth, who had been listening, caught her eye and gave a single nod. Physician Aldous arrived flushed from the wine he'd been enjoying before the evening became complicated. Saren gave him 30 seconds to reach his own assessment. "Compound sedative," she said, when 30 seconds had elapsed. "Winter root base, dried lilac as the carrier. Introduced through the wine within the last hour. His pulse reads clean at the surface because the compound doesn't touch the peripheral circulation. You'll need the capillary response at the nail beds to see it." Aldous looked at her over his spectacles, with the expression he reserved for moments when she said something he hadn't yet said himself. The wine was tested. Not for this combination. Separately, both register as botanical flavoring. Together, they interact at the blood level. She kept her voice even. She had learned, over years of being correct in rooms that found it inconvenient, that evenness carries further than sharpness. It's documented in Carwick's Botanical Compendium, 2nd volume, Chapter 9. A silence. "Page 43, she added. Aldous looked at her for a long moment. Then, with the dignity of a man choosing where to spend his energy, "I'll verify. The library is 2 floors up, and he's been unconscious for 7 minutes. Lord Edric, from near the door, made a sound like a man deciding between outrage and pragmatism. Tonight, credit to him, he chose pragmatism. If the physician can confirm, verify it after, Serene said, and turned back to the king on the floor. Aldous verified it. He climbed the 2 flights himself, came back pale-faced 20 minutes later with the relevant pages dog-eared, and announced his findings to the room with the tone of a man who has located an important thing and is not going to let the manner of its location reduce his satisfaction. "It's here," he said. "The eternal solitude bond." Saren read the passage twice. The eternal solitude bond was not, technically, a poison. It was a political instrument, the text explained, used in the old northern conflicts not to kill, but to humiliate, to make a public proof of a private lack. Its mechanism was almost theatrical in its precision. It suppressed the alpha connection entirely, dragging the heartbeat down to the thick lassitude of artificial sleep. And it could only be broken by one specific thing. Not an antidote, not medicine. The breath of someone who genuinely loved the person it had been cast upon, delivered to the chest, above the breastbone, where the pulse lived closest to the surface. The compound had been designed, the author noted with scholarly detachment, to prove a point. There is no one who loves you. Not truly. Not for yourself. The only way to break it was to be proven wrong. Serene closed the book. She stood with that knowledge for a moment, the shape of it, the specific weight of it, before she set it aside and looked up at the room full of women in their feast night gowns. "We'll try them one at a time," she said, systematically. Marta materialized at her elbow. Marta had the gift of appearing in rooms where things were happening and always knowing more than she should. "All of them?" she said. "All who are willing. We start with those who've had the most sustained contact with His Majesty and work outward from there." "You know this how?" Medical records, access logs, relevant information for understanding patient exposure. She felt Marta looking at her with the particular attention that meant, I see exactly what you're not saying. She did not return the look. Stop it. I didn't say anything. You were about to. I was about to say, Marta said with studied innocence, that it's very useful you've been keeping such careful professional notes about the king's social calendar. Serene handed her the clipboard. Write names as I call them, in order. Marta took it. She was smiling. Serene chose not to notice. The great hall was rearranged. Tables pushed to the walls, the velvet chair from the dais brought to the center and cushioned. Caleb lay in it with the helpless serenity of someone who could not object to the indignity. Lord Edric positioned himself at the edge of the proceedings and objected to everything. This is highly irregular, he said. Yes, Serene agreed. A handmaid directing a matter of royal health. Irregular, you've noted it. She was counting heads, cross-referencing the list. Lord Voss, unless you'd like to manage the biochemical conditions yourself, I suggest you let me work. Edric made a sound like a man swallowing something that did not go down cleanly. She felt, faintly, his gaze on the side of her face, assessing, reluctant, arriving somewhere in the territory of fine, but I will have opinions about this, recorded and dated. She could live with that. One by one, the women approached. Each knelt beside the cushioned chair. Each leaned close to the still figure of the king, some trembling, some composed, some with the careful hopefulness of someone who genuinely believed they might be the answer. Each breathed, slow and deliberate, against his chest. Nothing happened. Serene stood at the room's edge with her clipboard and watched with the concentrated attention of medical observation, and only Marta noticed that the knuckles of her right hand had gone white around the pen. The sixth was a duchess from the western coast who had known Caleb for 3 years and had always looked at him, Serene had noted, with the quality of attention she'd classified as genuine, not strategic. She leaned close. She breathed. Nothing. The Duchess rose, unhurried, and stepped back. If she was disappointed, it lived in the private part of her. The 15th was a baroness from the southern marches, copper-haired and straight-backed, beautiful in the uncomplicated way of women who have never had to think about it. She had walked with Caleb in the garden twice the previous spring. Serene knew this from the schedule Dame Isolde kept. She had no particular reason to remember it. The Baroness leaned close. Something real and unperformed moved across her face. Nothing. Serene's pen made a small mark on the page. She looked at the mark. They went on. Around the 40th attempt, while her hands kept marking names and her mouth kept calling numbers, Serene's mind went somewhere else. 4 years ago, the summer before he rode east. She had been in the East Corridor, the one with the carved columns, the shortcut she used between the herb stores and the upper service rooms, when the argument reached her. She hadn't meant to stop. Caleb's voice and his father's, and something in the quality of Harlan I's anger, had nailed her to the floor. A girl with no land, no dowry, no family name worth accounting for. I'm not asking your permission. You are asking the impossible. Do you understand what it means to be what you are? What a king's alliance? 2 days later, Nesta had been gone. The most beautiful handmaid in the castle, gone without explanation, and Caleb had returned from the Eastern campaign with the cold distance of a man who has made peace with losing something he'd wanted. Serene had told herself she understood. She had moved her shortcut to a different corridor. She had kept her eyes from the unguarded corner of his mouth, from the rare smile she was no longer allowed to catalogue. And she had been careful, very careful, for 4 years. Number 41, Marta said beside her. Serene looked up. Wrote the name. Watched. Nothing. By the 97th attempt, the hall had gone quiet, in the way of rooms where something has been tried so many times that the air itself is spent. One woman wept softly in the corner, the sound of it thin as a thread. Two others had begun arguing in low, furious voices about the order of the queue, as though that detail had ever mattered. The rest stood in small clusters, not looking at each other. Lord Edric's expression, over the course of the evening, had traveled through outrage and reluctant cooperation, and landed in something that looked like worry. It suited him less than the outrage. 97 women. 97 attempts. Nothing. Serene looked at the list, every name crossed off, every possibility accounted for. She had been thorough. She was always thorough. It was the quality she trusted most completely in herself, the thing she had built in place of other things she'd decided not to trust. She thought about the passage from the text. There is no one who loves you, not truly, not for yourself. Her throat tightened around something she would not examine directly. There is another possibility, she heard herself say. Marta went very still beside her. The handmaid who left 4 years ago, Serene continued, in the voice she used for difficult things that needed to sound clinical. Nesta. She's in the village at Ashford, half a day's ride, close enough that if someone leaves now, they could be back by dawn. She folded the list in her hands, a crease that was already there. She and His Majesty were. She should be given the opportunity. The silence that followed had a specific texture. Marta removed the clipboard from Serene's hands, very gently, the way you take something from someone who doesn't know they're holding it too tightly. She said nothing. She was very loud about it. "Send someone," Serene said. "I'll wait." She went to stand near the far wall, where a tapestry caught the draft, and looked at the stone floor and breathed in and out until those felt like ordinary activities again. The king's bedchamber was quieter than the great hall. It should have helped. It didn't. The group that remained was the smallest it had been all night. Dame Isolde, hands folded, expression giving nothing away. Marta, positioned where she could see every face in the room. Lord Edric near the door, wearing the posture of a man holding his objections in reserve. Sir Gareth, as steady as the stone he stood on. Owen at the threshold, the young gate guard who'd been reassigned to the inner halls tonight by Sir Gareth's order, and who kept finding himself present at moments he couldn't quite account for. Physician Aldous, carrying the careful pride of a man awaiting recognition for a contribution. And Saren. Calum lay in the large bed, still and pale against the dark coverlets. In the smaller room, the wrongness of his stillness was more visible. The absence of all that contained energy. The particular quality of the quiet he made that was nothing like sleep. One by one, the women of the castle attempted the counteraction. Aldous had reviewed the conditions again with the thoroughness of a man who did not intend to be wrong twice. Each woman knelt. Each breathed, slow and deliberate, against his chest. The room remained unchanged. Marta stepped back from the bedside and dusted her hands on her apron, with an expression of absolute practicality. "I don't like him anyway," she announced to the room. "He knocked over my flower arrangement yesterday. The blue irises. I had just gotten the proportions right." Lord Edric produced a sound of concentrated bureaucratic suffering. "Also," Marta continued, "I've been thinking about the list." She turned. She looked directly at Serene. "We missed someone." Serene did not look up from the medical notes she was not reading. "Serene." Dame Isolde's voice, quiet in the way she made things quiet when she wanted them to land somewhere specific. "I'm not on the list." Her voice was steady. It was always steady. "I am the physician's assistant. I'm here in a medical capacity." "You identified the compound," Dame Isolde said, with the gentle persistence of water finding a way through. "You've been here all night. You haven't attempted the counteraction." "That's because I—" She stopped, began again. "I don't love him. He is the king, and I am a handmaid. And those are facts that don't require anyone to perform a different interpretation." "Serene." Marta's voice had dropped its pleasantness. revealing something quieter and more serious underneath. Do you remember the night before he rode east? 4 years ago. You were in the herb room until dawn. You said it was for the campaign. The room was very quiet. I was preparing medicinal supplies. You prepared 40 doses of fever tincture. The campaign went east with 12 men. You stayed awake all night, making medicine for people you'd never met, for a journey you weren't going on, for a man you're telling me right now you don't care about. The pen in Serene's hand had stopped moving. She looked down at it and made her grip relax, finger by finger. And, Damisold said, he always comes back to you first. You may not have noticed, but every time, every campaign, every council journey, every inspection of the northern roads, the first place he goes when he returns to Valderhaven is wherever in this castle you happen to be. I have arranged both your schedules for 11 years. I noticed such things. Serene looked at the floor. She looked at the man in the bed. She thought, with the precision she brought to difficult diagnoses, about what it would mean if she tried and nothing happened. The exact shape of that outcome, confirmation, irrefutable, medical grade, of the thing she had spent 4 years carefully not letting herself believe. The way she would have to carry that knowledge afterward, every day, in the same castle, in the same corridors. If nothing happens, at least I'll know. I can put it down. I can stop. And beneath that, quieter, more honest. If nothing happens, I won't have anything left I can still call hope. She was still standing in the space between those two thoughts when the door opened. Owen. The rider's back from Ashford. Nesta is in the courtyard. The room breathed. Serene turned from the bed and went to the door. The almost moment dissolved into the night air like breath in cold. Owen stepped aside to let her pass, wearing the expression of a man slowly understanding he has done something, though he couldn't yet identify what. Behind her, she heard Marta say something very low and very restrained. She walked down the corridor and did not look back. Nesta arrived windswept from the ride, her dark hair disordered, her eyes wide with the confusion of someone taken from sleep and told only that they were needed. No explanation, no preparation, just the dark road and the lantern and the urgency of the hoofbeats. She was still beautiful. Serene observed this with the detached precision of an inventory and made certain nothing else appeared on her face. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I'm sorry for the hour." "What's happened?" Nesta's gaze moved through the room, reading faces, reading the quality of the silence, and landed on the figure in the bed. "Is he alive, sedated? There's a specific counteraction required, and we've reason to think you may be able to help." Serene kept her voice clean, professional, the voice of medicine rather than the voice of the thing she was not examining. Nesta looked at her with an expression Serene couldn't immediately classify. "You think I can wake him?" "It's possible." Something moved across Nesta's face. "Serene, the mechanism requires genuine attachment. It's biochemical in nature, not Serene." "Her name," said the second time, like a door being opened carefully from the other side. "I don't think it will work." A beat. "I cared for him," Nesta said quietly. "He was kind to me when other people weren't, and I will always be, fond of him the way you're fond of someone who once did you a real kindness, and you'd like the world to go well for them." "But that's not what the text describes, is it?" She looked at Serene steadily. "That's not what this requires." Serene said nothing. "The argument," Nesta said. 4 years ago, with his father, you heard it. I was in the corridor. I know. He knew too." She paused. "Serene, that argument was not about me. I was the test he ran to see how bad it would get. He needed to know what Harlan I would do if he thought the king's attention had gone to any handmaid. No name, no standing. So he used me as the shape of it, just to get the answer." Her voice was careful, watching Serene's face. "The handmaid with the white gold hair, who looked away every time he entered a room. That's the one Harlan I was shouting about. The room was very quiet. Something shifted in Serene's chest, something structural, like a load-bearing wall making a sound it should not make. No land, no dowry, no family name worth accounting for. Her. That argument had been about her. She had stood behind the carved column and heard every word and understood all of it completely wrong, and she had reorganized her entire life around that misunderstanding and spent 4 years. The door opened. Sir Gareth entered with 2 of his men, and between them, with the reluctance of someone who has run out of alternatives, came Ambassador Corvin. Behind him, her expression miserable and frightened in the way of someone who has realized they have been used, came Lady Margot. Sir Gareth laid out the evidence with a soldier's clarity, sequential, unembellished. Documents recovered from Corvin's aide when the man had tried to leave through the kitchen passage. Instructions written in Veldrath's diplomatic cipher. The deployment conditions for the Eternal Solitude Bond. Purpose: humiliation of the Aldenmore king on an occasion of maximum witness. Desired outcome: the public confirmation before 100 observers from across the continent that no woman alive genuinely loved him. Only the crown he wore, the power behind it, the name it carried. Because he refused Princess Rowena, Sir Gareth said, and because, after refusing her, he continued to show attention to someone Veldrath's king considered beneath him. The insult was considered double. Corvin, back to the wall, with guards on either side, attempted denial. Then misdirection. Then, when both failed, he shifted to the calculation. If the bond had not been broken, if he could position this as a thwarted attempt rather than a successful humiliation that had itself been humiliated, he could still bargain. The bond cannot be broken, he said, with the confidence of a man who believes he is holding the only unplayed card. The mechanism requires something none of the people in this room possess. Not admiration, not loyalty. Not the love that was present before the crown, Dame Isolde said, from her chair by the window. She said it without inflection, the way one states something that has been true for a long time and does not require the support of emphasis. Love that does not know how to stop, she continued. Her eyes moved briefly across the room. That is what the text specifies. Every face turned. Serene stood against the far wall with her clipboard at her hip, and her expression arranged into the professional composure she had been building and maintaining and reinforcing for 11 years. She could feel the weight of all those faces, the particular attention of a room that has just understood something and is waiting to see if the understanding is correct. She looked at Calum. She thought about the doorway. 16 years old, dry-eyed, her father's hand cold between hers. The boy who had stood there and not said the 6 words, and not left either, just stayed in that threshold with the helpless patience of someone who has nothing to offer, but is not willing to leave the person alone. She thought about the south corridor in the gray pre-dawn, the smell of horses and road dust and cold air off the sea, how she always managed to be somewhere nearby when he came back from a campaign, how she always told herself it was coincidence. She thought about 40 jars of tincture on a shelf, made through a whole night because her hands needed somewhere to put the fear she was not allowed to have. She thought about 4 years of distance, built on an argument she had heard and understood exactly wrong. "I don't love him," she said. Her voice was steady. That was the particular quality of a lie practiced long enough. It learns to say itself. "I am a handmaid. He is a king. There is no version of the world in which—" Across the room, Owen moved. Not toward her. Toward Corvin, who had taken one step forward during her speech, with the intention of someone about to make an intervention. Owen's fist connected with the ambassador's jaw, at the precise angle and velocity of someone who has been wanting to do this for some time, and has decided the moment has arrived. Corvin sat down on the stone floor. "My apologies," Owen said, to Sir Gareth, with the expression of a man not apologizing at all. "My hand slipped." Sir Gareth regarded Owen for a long moment. Indeed, he said, and returned his attention to the room. Corvin said something from the floor that was mostly consonants. Serene looked at the bed. She looked at the man in it, still, pale, the gray dark of his eyes hidden behind closed lids, his face stripped in sleep of all the careful architecture of kingship, looking, just briefly, like the boy who had stood in a doorway 11 years ago and not known what to say. I don't love him. I have been not loving him for 11 years with the energy of someone fighting a river current from the inside, and I am so tired. She walked to the bedside. She went to her knees on the cold stone floor. She looked at his face, the dark jaw, the small scar above his left brow from a campaign she had heard described secondhand and thought about for weeks without admitting to herself why. She pressed her palm lightly to his chest, above the breastbone, and felt the wrong rhythm of his heart through the fabric. Slow, muffled, waiting. The room held its breath with her. She bent forward. She thought, I have loved you since before you were a king. I loved you in a doorway when you were 16 and didn't know what to offer. I loved you in the smell of horses and road dust at dawn. I loved you in 40 jars of tincture and 4 years of looking at the wall behind your left ear. She breathed, slow and deliberate, into the warmth of her palm against his chest. For a moment, nothing. Then, beneath her hand, a change. The wrong rhythm unwinding, beat by beat, like ice releasing at the first true day of spring. The thick, dragging slowness clearing. What she felt under her palm was a heart waking up. Caleb's eyes opened, dark gray irises, blurred with the sediment of artificial sleep. And then she watched it happen, like a lock turning. The color changed, the dark of them giving way, replaced by amber. Gold, the color of sunlight held in old honey. The color of something that had been looking for this for a long time. She sat back, fast. Her hand left his chest. She was on her feet before the decision had fully formed. You're awake, she said, in the voice of medicine, of competence, of everything that was not the thing her hand could still feel. I'll send for Physician Aldous. Saren. His voice came out rough, scraped thin, a sound from somewhere he was still finding his way back from. She was already turning for the door. She heard him say her name again behind her. Not a question, not a command, just her name, said the way you say something you have been keeping somewhere safe and are only now allowed to say aloud. She went through the door and did not let herself stop. Behind her, in the room, she heard Marta say, very quietly, "Oh, for the love of—" The door closed. Serene stood in the corridor in the dark and breathed. Her hand was still warm. The aftermath of a crisis, Serene had learned, was its own kind of weather. Not dramatic, just relentless, the way certain rains are. In the 2 days that followed the feast, Walderhaven moved through its recovery with the efficiency of a household that had survived difficulty before and knew the procedure. Ambassador Corvin was escorted to the eastern gate at first light with a sealed diplomatic warning and the clear understanding that his welcome in Aldenmore had been permanently exhausted. Lady Margot, pale, subdued, and bewildered in the particular way of someone who has been used for someone else's purpose, and is only now understanding the extent of it, was given a private meeting with Lord Edric. 3 months of charitable service, no criminal charges, a formal acknowledgement entered into the record that she had been deceived rather than malicious. Nesta rode back to Ashford with a purse of coin, and what Serene hoped, watching the horse disappear through the gate, was a lighter conscience. The Duchess Heloise, Margot's elder sister and the Western Alliance's representative, received a personal letter from Caleb that Lord Edric would later describe, with the tone of a man who does not often find himself impressed, as the most efficient diplomatic correspondence the king had ever produced. All of this Serene knew from second-hand accounts. She had taken on every available task in the herb room. The inventory was completed twice. The junior handmaids received a comprehensive lesson in wound treatment, fever management, and the identification of 12 common toxic plants, a lesson that Lord Edric, passing the doorway on his afternoon circuit, paused to observe for a full minute before moving on, which was as close to approval as he typically got. The medical ledgers were reorganized from chronological order to compound classification. The drying racks were rotated. 3 batches of winter tinctures were prepared for the stores. Serene's hands stayed occupied. Her hands staying occupied was the important thing. Brennan arrived on the first morning. He was a large man, with the kind of open face that looked built for cheerfulness, and usually was. Today, he had the expression of a man who has been given an assignment he can see is going to be complicated, but has decided to take it on anyway. "From His Majesty," he said, holding out a sealed letter. Serene was grinding fennel seed. "Leave it on the table." He left it on the table. She finished the fennel. She prepared the evening tinctures. She straightened the equipment she'd already straightened twice. The letter sat in the corner of the table and did not move. When she left for the evening, it was still there. She told herself she would read it in the morning. On the second morning, Brennan appeared again. He had, this time, the look of a man who has thought carefully about what he's walking into and committed to it. "From His Majesty." "Leave it on the table." He set the second letter on top of the first, with the careful deliberateness of a man stacking something that might be fragile. Then he paused. "He wrote them himself," he said, "not as pressure, as information, the particular information of a man who knows it matters." Calum's official correspondence was dictated to his secretary and signed at the end. The ones he wrote himself were rare. Sarah knew this. She should not know this as well as she did. "Thank you, Brennan," she said. He left. The 2 sealed letters sat on the corner of the table. She ground more fennel. She had ground more fennel than the castle could use before spring. On the third morning, the door of the herb room opened, and the voice that came through it was not Brennan's. "I've run out of letters." Serene's hands went still on the pestle. The fennel dust settled in the silence. She did not turn around. She gave herself 3 seconds, she counted them, to compose her expression, her hands, the set of her shoulders, into something that did not betray the fact that the sound of his voice in this room made her chest do something she had no medical terminology for. "Leave them on the table," she said, before her thinking had caught up. A pause. "I just told you, I've run out." She turned then, because she couldn't keep her back to a room that contained him without it becoming too obvious she was trying. He was in the doorway, filling it, the way he filled most doorways, broad-shouldered in a plain gray doublet that meant he'd come from something informal. No crown, no ceremony. His dark hair was slightly less arranged than it typically was in public, as though he'd come directly from somewhere that hadn't involved a mirror. And there was a quality in his expression she had never seen him use in public, careful and direct at the same time. The expression of a man who has decided to say a true thing and is simply waiting to see where it lands. His eyes were amber. Still. She'd been not noticing for 2 days, and she'd noticed anyway, every time. She looked at the 2 sealed letters on the table. She looked back at him. "Your Majesty shouldn't be here without—" "Brennan is in the corridor," he said. "I told him to wait." "That's not Serene. Not Your Majesty, not any formal address. Just her name, said the way he'd said it from the bed when his eyes first opened, stripped of everything decorative, certain of itself. You didn't read either of them." "I've been busy." "I know." He stepped into the room, not toward her, just inside, past the threshold. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, arms at his sides, and looked at her across the full, cluttered space of the herb room. The drying bundles overhead, the ranked jars, the grinding table with its residue of 3 days' unnecessary fennel. The distance between them was 6 feet, the width of a work table, the accumulated sum of a decade of decisions about where to stand. She held her ground. She was skilled at holding her ground. "What did they say?" she said, and then caught herself, because asking was the same as caring, and she was supposed to be. "That I woke up and the first thing I was aware of was the smell of herbs on your hands." His voice was direct, the way he was in councils and assessments, and every conversation where he had decided truth was more efficient than anything else. "That I've been carrying the memory of your face 10 inches from mine every hour since. That I don't know how to say this in a way that—" He stopped. Exhaled. "I am not skilled at the language of this." "Then don't. I've been watching you walk through this castle for 11 years. The words came out flat and certain, stripped of all ornamentation. "Before I was king, before the campaign, before the border and the throne and any of it. You were 14 years old, you weren't crying, and I stood in your father's doorway and I didn't know what to offer you. I still don't. I have never been the kind of person who knows what to offer." He looked at her steadily. "But I know that I have been looking at you for 11 years, and I would like to stop pretending otherwise." The herb room was quiet. Outside, distantly, the castle's morning sounds, boots in a corridor 2 floors up, the particular cold wind off the northern sea that found every gap in Walderhaven's old walls. The drying bundles moved slightly in the draft, the faint, dry sweetness of last summer's chamomile, the sharper edge of sage. "You had other women," she said. The sentence came out before she'd decided to say it. He didn't flinch. "Yes." "Several." "Yes." A pause. "None of them were you." "I understand that's not a satisfying answer, but it's the honest one." Her throat tightened. She looked at the rows of jars behind him, carefully arranged, rearranged again over the past 2 days, because her hands had needed something to do with the feeling of not knowing. "Serene," he said, "I can see you deciding whether to walk out of this room." "I'm deciding whether to stay in it," she said. It was, she realized as she said it, the most honest thing she had said to him in 4 years. He was quiet for a moment. The 6 feet between them felt different than it had a minute ago. Not smaller, but altered, like a measurement that had been taken with the wrong instrument. "The argument," he said, 4 years ago, in the East Corridor." Her hands went still again. "My father was not speaking about Nesta," he said. "She was the shape I gave it. I needed to know what would happen before I said anything to you directly. I needed to know how bad it would be." He paused. "It was worse than I'd prepared for. He sent her away that night. I had my answer." Another pause. Longer. The kind that has something heavier in it. "I decided to wait. I'm not entirely certain what I was waiting for. I think I was waiting for you to look at me." "I did look at you," she said. "You looked at the wall behind my ear." The sound that came out of her was not quite a laugh. It surprised her. A warm, sudden fracture in 4 years of professional composure. Pressure releasing through a crack that had always been there. He was watching her with the expression she hadn't had a name for before tonight, and was only now beginning to understand. The one he'd been keeping in reserve, specifically and only for her. "I was angry," she said, quieter now. "For years, or I thought I was. I heard that argument, and I thought I knew what it meant, and so I know what you thought. 4 years of, I know." He moved then, not across the room, not toward her, just straightened from the door, as though the conversation had reached the point where leaning no longer suited the weight of what was being said. "I thought the distance was intentional. I thought you were telling me something. So I kept mine." She looked at him. He looked at her. Outside, the wind found another gap in the old northern wall. The herbs moved in the draft. Summer caught in winter, dried and kept, and still useful. "That is," she said slowly, "the most comprehensively unsuccessful communication I have ever encountered. And I once spent 40 minutes explaining to Lord Edric why the king's headache could not be cured by prayer." The corner of his mouth moved. There, the real one. The one she'd maintained a rule about for 4 years. She let herself look at it. "I value you," he said, watching her face. "I respect you. I—" He exhaled. "Serin, I love you. I am telling you that right now. If you require it in writing with the royal seal, I will have it prepared before noon." The room was very quiet. She looked at him directly. Not the careful peripheral attention she'd been using for years. Not the medical catalog of jaw tension and eye corner, and the way his shoulders sat when he was tired. Directly. The way she hadn't allowed herself. He was taller than any room seemed quite built for. His eyes were amber and patient, and they had been watching her for 11 years, in the way of a man who has decided to want something and has the discipline to hold that want carefully. She was so tired of distance. "I'll still tell you when you're wrong," she said at last. "I know. About medicine, about sleep, about the campaign diet, which is genuinely inadequate. I have read the records. I know. I won't pretend to defer to you simply because you're serene." Very quietly. "I know." The royal decree went out that same afternoon, not phrased as a question. Calum had never used the language of requests when he had already made a decision. What he sent to the council was a statement of what would be, in the flat declarative style he used when he considered a matter settled. Serene heard about it from Marta, who appeared in the herb room at midday with a tea tray she had clearly been holding outside the door for 20 minutes before deciding it was appropriate to enter. "He sent a letter to the council this morning," Marta said, with an air of studied casualness, "while you were presumably in here, conducting further unnecessary experiments with fennel." Serene was putting the fennel away. There was a great deal of it to put away. "The letter announced," Marta continued, examining the color of her tea, "that the person who broke the eternal solitude bond had demonstrated the only qualification that mattered for the position of Queen of Aldenmore." She set the cup down. "It named you. Full name, your father's name, your current position in the household." It was not phrased as a request. Serene put the last jar on the shelf. "Lord Edric," Marta added, "is reported to have said this was highly irregular." "What did His Majesty say?" Marta smiled into her tea. "That he was aware." The conversation, it deserved a more substantial word, but she could not find one, happened that evening in the herb room, because that was where they both ended up when the official day had concluded and the castle had settled into the particular quiet that came after supper in winter. Calum had apparently decided, at some point between the morning decree and the evening, that the herb room was now a place where he was allowed to be. He sat on the edge of the work table with the ease of a man who has made a decision and has no reservations about it. And he had, she noticed, retrieved the 2 unopened letters and placed them on the shelf in front of the fennel jars. She had the impression he found this quietly funny. She chose not to confirm this impression. "You could have asked me first," she said. "I did ask you." He looked at her steadily. "You're the only one I asked. The council received information." She stood by the window. Outside, the sea was invisible in the dark, but she could hear it, the low, constant sound of it, the same sound she'd heard from her father's chamber the day he died. The horizon that kept being there, even when everything else stopped. "I don't know how to be a queen," she said. "I don't know how to be a husband." He said it the same way he said everything true, without apology, without softening, as a plain fact. "We'll be inadequate at different things. It will probably be useful." She looked at him. "I'll still have the herb room," she said, not a question. "The herb room will be redesignated as the official Royal Medical Chambers, and you will hold the position of Chief Physician's Advisor." Aldous will require approximately 3 weeks to work through his feelings about this, and will ultimately conclude that he recommended the arrangement himself. "That's very specific. I've been thinking about it for some time." She turned back to the window. The dark outside, the sea she couldn't see. All of it. The corridors she'd memorized, the schedules she'd arranged, the routes she'd chosen and rechosen and chosen again to avoid walking too close to wherever he was. The whole careful architecture of the life she'd built around not having him. She could keep it. She had been keeping it for 4 years with considerable competence. She thought about what it had cost her. "Yes," she said. The words sat in the cold air between them. She heard him. "Breathe. I'll still tell you when you've missed a meal," she said. "And when the headache is fatigue rather than tension. Those require different treatment, and you've been treating them interchangeably for 3 years. Saren. And the campaign rations need revision. I have written a report. It is thorough. Saren." He was across the room. She hadn't tracked the moment he moved, and he was standing in front of her, not close enough to touch, the same distance he'd always kept, but facing her with nothing between them, and his expression was the one she'd spent 4 years practicing not looking for. She looked at it. "I know," he said. "All of it. I know." The sea moved in the dark outside the window, indifferent and permanent. The dried herbs shifted overhead in the draft from under the sill. He raised his hand and touched her face, 2 fingers, light as breath, against her jaw. "The way you touch something you have been careful about for a very long time and have finally, carefully, been given permission to stop being careful about." She felt it the whole length of her. She stood perfectly still and let it happen. The way you stand in the first real warmth of spring and simply let the cold go. "Serene," he said, and it meant nothing except her name, and it meant everything. There was a conversation they still needed to have. It happened the next morning, in the early quiet before the day's official demands began. The herb room had become, without formal announcement, a place they both ended up. He had brought the tea himself. She noted this, recognized it as a gesture that had required thought, and sat across the work table from her, with his hands around the cup, and talked with the directness she'd always known was in him, the directness he'd been keeping in reserve for a conversation worth spending it on. "The other women," she said, because it needed to be said, and she needed to hear the answer without looking away from it. "There were some," he said, "no evasion. None serious. None—" He found the words carefully, not to soften them, but to make them accurate. "None that I was honest with about the reason." What was the reason? A king without anyone in his company invites speculation. My father made this very clear from the time I was 17. He said it flatly, the way he said things that cost him something. So I was present, in the ways that were required, with women who understood the arrangement. I didn't lie to them. They knew I was offering nothing permanent. He looked at her. But I let them believe it was preference. It was policy. Serene held the warmth of the cup between her palms. "And Nesta," she said, "was a test I ran with her knowledge and her agreement. She knew exactly what she was doing. I paid her well for the risk, and I was grateful. And I was sorry it cost her the position here." He paused. "I sent funds to her household in Ashford for 2 years afterward." She had not known that. She said it alongside everything else she was rearranging, the new pieces finding their places, shifting the others. "You were waiting the whole time," she said. "I was waiting for you to stop looking at the wall behind my ear." He said it without the lightness that might have made it easier. Just the fact, plain and present. "I didn't know you'd heard the argument. I didn't know you'd understood it wrong. I thought the distance was a message. I thought you were telling me to stay back." He set his cup down. "So I stayed back." Serene thought about 4 years. Not abstractly, specifically. The weight of each one. The pre-dawn hours in the herb room, with 40 jars of tincture for 12 men. The south corridor she'd stopped using. The schedules she'd let Dame Isolde arrange, without asking why they always seemed to put her where he returned to. "We were both," she said, operating on entirely incorrect information. The corner of his mouth. "Yes. For 4 years. Yes. I want it noted, she said, that I heard an argument and drew a logical conclusion from the available evidence. The evidence was incomplete. I was working with what I had. She looked at him across the table. Next time, one of us says something directly. Agreed. Before 4 years pass. I think we can manage that. His eyes were warm, the real warmth, not the distributed warmth of courts and councils. All of it aimed at her, with the patience of 11 years of careful waiting. She found, after 4 years of wall and ear and distance, that she had very little left in the way of defense against it. My father's notebooks, she said after a moment. The 3 volumes. I'd like them to be part of the Royal Medical Library's permanent collection. He looked at her. If they're in the library, they're part of the castle's record, she said. They don't... She stopped, tried again. He doesn't disappear. Caleb placed his hand on the table between them, palm up, not reaching, not claiming, just present, an offer she could take or leave. She looked at it. She put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, careful and certain. Done, he said. The Queen of Aldenmore was reviewing a prescription. Physician Aldous stood on the other side of the work table, with the expression he had been developing and refining over the past 3 months. A complex arrangement of professional dignity, genuine respect, residual resistance, and the particular satisfaction of a man who has decided that he had, in fact, always recognized exceptional talent when it was placed in front of him, and had, in fact, always expected things would turn out this way. It was an expression that required considerable maintenance. He was getting better at it. The willow bark preparation, Serene said, without looking up, is correctly dosed, Aldous said, is 2 measures short for Lord Edric's constitution. She turned the page. His joint inflammation worsened significantly through the winter months. The standard dose will be insufficient by February. I've noted the adjustment here. Aldous looked at the notation. He looked at her. He breathed through his nose in the manner of a man exercising significant voluntary restraint. I will take it under advisement. You'll make the change, she said pleasantly. Because I'm right, and you know it. A pause of appropriate length. The adjustment has merit. She handed him the prescription. He took it with the dignity of a man who had identified a critical piece of historical botanical knowledge that had proven essential to a royal medical emergency, and who now occupied a complicated but ultimately productive professional relationship with the woman who had made that knowledge necessary. He left. The door had barely closed when it opened again. Caleb's presence was something she had stopped pretending not to register. There was simply no longer any point. She knew the weight of his step on the stone floors, the particular quality of the air in a room when he entered it, the warmth of him that arrived half a second before he did. She had known all of this for 11 years. She was done with the pretending. Aldous looked satisfied, he said. Aldous looked like a man who has been correct by association and finds it sufficient. He crossed the room and looked over her shoulder at the day's work, a habit acquired over 3 months. The morning stop before council, the focused attention of a man who genuinely wanted to understand the world she moved through. She had found, unexpectedly, that she had been waiting for someone to look at her work this way. Not to question it, just to see it, to take it seriously as the thing it was. The Western supply list, she said. 3 compounds we're not currently stocking. We'll need them before the deep cold. He picked it up. He read it, actually read it all the way through. She knew his reading pace, and took the pen from the table and signed at the bottom. Requisitioned by this afternoon, he said, setting it down. You just signed a medical supply list. It's the most sensible thing I'll sign today. The rest is the boundary survey, a wool tariff, and a letter from the Veldrath ambassador's replacement that Edric is drafting a response to. He paused. Edric finds the drafting very satisfying. She turned on her stool to look at him. He was standing close. The closeness that had been allowed now, easy and familiar, nothing performed about it. He looked tired, in the specific way of midwinter kingship, the kind that accumulated rather than arrived, weight added daily in small amounts until it showed in the way a man held his shoulders. She had learned the particular geography of his tiredness, the same way she'd learned everything about him, by watching, recording, refusing to care too much, and caring too much anyway. "When did you last eat a full meal?" she said. "I had, sitting down, without a document in front of you." He considered this for a moment that was longer than reassuring. "I'll send something up," she said. "Council is in 20 minutes. I'll have something sent to council." He was watching her with the expression that appeared when she said something that landed more deeply than she intended, the one that had appeared when she mentioned her father's notebooks, and the morning she'd come to the table in the rooms they now shared to find him already there, with the tea made and the third notebook open on the table, reading it with the careful attention he brought to things that mattered to her. "The council," he said, "will ask why I'm late. Tell them the physician detained you." "You're not technically my physician." "I am technically your wife." She looked at him. "Sit down for 5 minutes. I'll find something from the stores. Then you can go and be appropriately grave, and the council won't know the difference." A silence. Then he pulled out the stool across from her and sat. Just that simply, without argument, the way he had started doing things she asked. Not giving in, but choosing. The particular choice of a man who has found someone whose judgment he trusts on specific matters, and sees no reason to perform resistance about it. She went to the cabinet and found the hard cheese and the dried apricots she kept for exactly this. Exactly this. She recognized it now. The same habit she'd had for years before she'd had any claim to it. Maintaining stores for someone else's long days and missed meals. She put them in front of him. He looked at them. He looked at her. "You've been keeping this here?" he said. "I keep a variety of stores." "You've been keeping this here." She sat back down and picked up the next document. "Eat," she said. He was quiet for a moment. She could feel him not looking away. The quality of his attention that was different from anyone else's she had known. More complete, less performed. The attention of a man who had been watching her for 11 years. And had been given permission, finally, to stop pretending he hadn't. "Serin," he said. "I know," she said without looking up. She did know. She knew the geography of his tiredness and the angle of his jaw, and the difference between the smile he distributed for political purposes and the one that appeared when something she said surprised him. She knew it all, the way she knew that the herb room smelled of everything she had built her life from, and that his presence in it had changed the smell of it, and that she had not, even once, minded. "You're happy," he said. An observation, not a question. She looked at him across the work table, the requisition lists and prescription adjustments, and the fennel dust that never quite cleared, and on the shelf in the corner, the 2 sealed letters she had decided to keep. "Yes," she said. He ate the cheese and the dried apricots. He would be 7 minutes late to council, and Edric would record it, and would not, ultimately, ask why, because he had been in the room 3 months ago, when a handmaid with a botanist's nose and her dead father's notebooks had knelt beside the king and disproved the one thing the eternal solitude bond had been designed to claim was true. The northern sea moved beyond the window, gray and permanent, indifferent to the 100 things that had happened and the 100 more that would. Serin made a small notation in the margin of the prescription and felt, somewhere below all her competence and all her careful practicality, the specific quiet of someone who has stopped fighting a current and discovered that the water, which she had always expected to be cold, is warm. She had not known it would feel so much like rest. This is a story about 2 people who loved each other for 11 years and never said a word. Not because they didn't feel it, but because they each decided, quietly and separately, that they weren't allowed to. She was a handmaid. He was a king. She built her life around being useful instead of wanted. He kept his distance to protect her and called it patience. And somewhere in the space between those 2 silences 4 years of misunderstanding grew roots. It took a political assassination attempt, an ancient compound designed to prove a man unlovable, and 97 failed tries before the truth finally had nowhere left to hide. What The Crown and the Healer is really about is not the magic or the intrigue. It's the quiet, exhausting cost of convincing yourself that what you feel doesn't count. The way we protect ourselves by staying useful. The way we mistake someone else's distance for indifference and never think to ask. The way love, real love, the kind that doesn't know how to stop, survives years of wrong conclusions and poor communication, and still manages to be exactly where it was left. The lesson isn't love conquers all. It's simpler and harder than that. Say the thing before 4 years pass. Because the person on the other side of your carefully maintained distance might be doing exactly what you're doing, watching the wall behind your ear and calling it moving on. If you made it this far, you already know how this one felt. Drop a comment telling me, were you team just say something already? Or did you completely understand why they didn't? No wrong answers. I genuinely want to know which one hit closer to home. And if this kind of story is your thing, slow burn, wrong conclusions, two people being spectacularly bad at communication until they aren't, hit subscribe and the bell so you don't miss the next one. Every story here is for the people who feel things quietly and carry them a little too long. Thank you for watching.